Hello, my name's Daniel Ripley from CG Dreams, and today we're going to be looking at a very simplistic way to basically get the detail from a model within ZBrush over into Modo. Now, of course, there's lots of tweakings that you can do and lots of things you can fiddle about with to make it better, but I'm going to give you the core things that you need to know and things that I found have made a difference to my work. Being that I've started with this particular asset that comes with ZBrush from my previous video, I'm now going to continue in this video with the same asset. So this video is about getting your detail from within ZBrush over into Modo. This also applies to other applications. But before we get into the simple process of just simply creating maps, I wanted to really point out a few things which greatly adds the results that you're going to get or not get according to other factors. So here you have the same model, but what I'm hoping that you can see is the difference between the two. So the primary difference that I'm hoping you're seeing is not primarily the polygon count, but the edge flow. You can clearly see in the model on the left that you've got these edge loops that are surrounding key areas of the anatomy. So like the pectoralis major, we've got loops around the biceps, we've got loops around the deltoid. You can see here that we've got topology which is aiding in working with the flow of your sculpt. Now, if you've got this in your model, it means that basically you can have a relatively low polygon model while retaining and holding a great deal of detail. I'm not talking about the kind of detail that is skin pores, I'm talking about surface form, the forms that make up volume and the basic shapes. You can clearly see there's so many of these here. The one on the right hand side, however, doesn't hold any of this topology, so that the edge flow is forced, as you can see here. What tends to happen is when we send a model over from say ZBrush to Modo and apply a subdivisional smoothing, we find that we lose a great deal of these shapes and forms because they're really not held together by the edge flow. So the first thing that I wanted to point out is getting the detail or the best results between ZBrush and Modo isn't all about creating massive maps, although that certainly helps, but so does this particular factor. The other factor that I wanted to bring out is the UV map itself. If you make a very good UV map and you utilize the areas of the map to hold the most data, then you're going to get better quality maps. It's as simple as that, especially if these maps are not distorted. This really goes off into a different area to what I wanted to be talking about in this video, but it's just something that I wanted to bring out, is that it's not just down to making these maps between ZBrush and Modo. It's also the quality of your model and your UV maps. Now, I did make a video a while ago which talks about how you can work out the polygon amount to get the right amount of data into your texture map. So if you want to check out that video, you can do so with the link that I've placed right here. And this takes you back to an earlier version of ZBrush, but what I'm talking about still applies. It applies to polygon or poly painting. So now that I've got that out of the way, the next thing is that how do you get a map made from ZBrush and get it over into Modo? Well, there's a few things that we want to do. We want to be able to distinguish the difference between surface volume and minute micro details. These are really, they're separate things that you want to be thinking about when you're going through the process. So the surface form is what I've been talking about the big masses, what makes up the silhouette of our model. So with that, what we need to do now is we need to make sure obviously our UVs are all ready and everything, and then go ahead to the next step of creating some fine details on the skin. But before we do this, it's really essential that we have settled with our base mesh, and that the base mesh really does hold all of the volumes that you want. The way that you can check this without subdividing it is go to the Geometry tab, go down to what's called Dynamic Subdivision, which is the equivalent of applying smoothing in ZBrush. And then what you're able to do is you're able to see exactly what the mesh looks like when smoothing's been applied. The good thing about this is you have the ability to work on a low polygon model, or the low polygon version, while the smoothing's applied, so you can see exactly how much of this surface form is really coming out in just a smoothed model of it. So it may be, for instance, that the deltoid really isn't doing its job properly. Maybe you wanted the deltoid to stand out a little bit more on its own without any maps applied. So I'm just sort of doing that here quickly now. And we can take the dynamic sub D off, and you can see here that it's actually deformed the base mesh so that it can apply that amount of volume when it's smoothed. Wherever you do this within ZBrush, or you do it from bringing the base mesh into ZBrush, the next step applies, and it's really important when creating displacement maps within within ZBrush, and that is to store a morph target. What a store morph target does is it will literally take a snapshot of the way the mesh is right now before you start to subdivide it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the old one I've got there, and I'm just going to click on Store MT for Store Morph Target. And when I start to subdivide this, what it will do is it will start to smooth the actual base mesh level, which is what we got here now. And when it starts to do this, it will kind of take away some of the surface form that was originally there, which we definitely want to keep. So now we've stored the morph target, the next thing is we want to subdivide this many times until we've got to the level that we can start to add these skin pores and finer details. So I'm going to subdivide this a number of times. I'm going to keep on going. I think we can get away with just one more, and we'll see what sort of polygon count we've got there. Okay, that's not bad. It's a good idea to look up a bit close to see whether there's enough geometry there. You can normally see. I'm not going to go for a crazy amount of detail, just enough just to demonstrate what I'm going to be showing you in this video. The next thing that we want to do is we want to store the fine minute micro details into layers, and there's several reasons why you would do this, and I'm going to explain as we go. To create layers, we go to the layers on the right hand side here, and you can see I've already got a couple of layers already added. I'm just going to show you what I've done on one of those layers. Turn it on. So you can see here that I just put a little bit of skin pores on this layer. Let's get a little bit closer. And for those of you who have not used ZBrush, not used to it, I use the standard brush. The brushes can be found from the drop down menu here, or from here. And I tend to go for the spray and use the alpha, which is 07, and this is pretty good for that. When you're in layers mode, initially when you create a layer, it goes straight into record mode. When you press the button again, it just goes to be visible. So if you want to go back into record, you just press on the record button and then off it goes. I prefer not to have any poly paint showing at the time, and I'm just going to go in there and just add a few more details in there. Okay, just push those details out a little bit more. Now, as I mentioned a minute ago, I said there's several reasons why you may want to have it on layers. The first reason is the fact that you can just simply turn layers off. This means that you can choose what map is going to have what amount of detail. Typically, what you would do is you would have the displacement map to hold all your big service forms, and then you would have the normal map to hold your high frequency details. So what you can do is you can just turn off these details when you're creating your displacement map, just to hold those service forms. What I would tend to do when I'm doing a model, this is a model that obviously came with ZBrush, but I would tend to do with my own is I would create several layers, a layer for skin pores, a layer for creases, and I will keep on working like that. So I'll just press that, and I'll press the record button on this one. Let's turn on this. And I don't particularly like that layer. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to create a new layer. And on here I'm going to go for the damn standard brush. I quite like this to add a few more details into there as far as the creases go. And let's just go through there like that. Okay, so I'm not going to do too much to this, just enough for you to kind of see what I'm doing and where I'm going with this. Okay, so you want to get all your details into these layers, and what you can do when you've got these details into there is you can then tweak these layers. What I mean by this is you can see the slider here is already at 100%, but you can see there's another slider here, and what you can do with this slider is you can push it beyond that. You can see there that I'm pushing the details out further than what I actually originally done, and this really does help you get some really nice details pushed into your maps. So for instance, if I go to this top one here, you can even take them down, but as I said, you can even push them out. You can really push them out. I don't want to go too crazy. That's quite nice. So now that I've added my layers here, I'm just going to select this one here in the middle. Don't need that one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off these layers. I'm going to go all the way down to the base mesh level. Make sure that I've got UVs, and if you haven't, you can see that the delete UV and morph UV won't be there anymore. So I'm going to just create a UV map from within ZBrush, and the PUV tiles seems to do quite a good job for this. The map size I'm going to go for in this demonstration is a 4K map, but I would encourage you to really watch the other video that I made some time ago, so that you can really distinguish how much detail you're likely to get in a certain size map according to how many polygons that you're actually sculpting on. There's no point creating a 6 million polygon mesh with all the details if you're going to put it into a 1024 map, because it's simply not going to hold the detail. Okay, so I've got the map there. I'm happy with that. The next thing is to create a displacement map. Now there's several types, well there's two types of displacement map that I'm going to be talking about, and the bog standard one will be done from here. So that's the one I'm going to go for. If you want to create a 32-bit displacement map, I tend to use the ZBrush plugin here, and it's, where is it? It's one of these. It's right in front of me, multi-map exporter. I'm not going to go into this because this will require its own tutorial, but if you type in 32-bit displacement map ZBrush, there will be some tutorials that come up. So there's a 32-bit version, but it will slow down Modo. Now before we create the displacement map, it's important that at this particular stage that we actually switch our model back to the original cage base mesh that we had originally. What would have happened is when we subdivided the base mesh, that a lot of the surface forms would have smoothed down somewhat. So we're going to go back to the original, how we originally intended it. So we go to the wolf target and we click on switch. If you just look at the shoulder area here, you should see a little bit of movement there. Now it may not seem that there's a lot going on, but this is something that is really essential to the development of a good quality displacement map. It's important that your model holds and retains as much of the service form as possible so that the map doesn't have to do or make up for it. In some cases you'll find that this is rather drastic, especially on low polygon models, much lower than this. The reason why I'm sending a polygon model such as this kind of level, this mesh based level, is because I'm not going to be rigging it. I'm not going to be doing anything in it in Modo other than just producing game art, and for that reason I will try to put as much surface form into the base mesh as possible, and to keep the polygon level as high as I can get away with if it's for game art. This means that the displacement map doesn't have to do as much, and that your render is going to look overall much better. So I would like to go for even a level maybe higher than this if I was to bring this into Modo for a high quality still render. Obviously for animation it's different, but for a game art render, try to kind of find a compromise where it's able to hold its own form. And indeed, even if you've got a base mesh which hasn't got the ideal topology, you may have to have the polygon level a little bit higher than you maybe wanted to, just so that it holds a bit more of its service form. Of course you can, if you want to, go really low and allow the displacement map to do its job all the way through. But if you want the best detail, that's what I recommend that you do. So first of all, we're going to be generating this displacement map. So we're going to go to displacement map, make sure that adapt tip's on, and the UV map size I'm going to create is only 4K. This should be sufficient for what I'm showing you. So I'm just going to click on the create displace map, and it will go through that process. And then once it's finished the displacement map production, then basically I'm going to go and turn on the surface details at the higher level, and then I'm going to go down a couple of sub-D levels and then create just those surface details in a normal map. So what you'll end up having at the end of it is one map which is going to help retain the surface form, and another map which puts all of the surface detail into it, which will be the normal map. So our displacement map has now been made. The next thing is we need to create our normal map. So I'm going to turn the displacement map off for the moment, and I'm going to, if you're going to export your base mesh, you can export it at this point if you wanted to, but we're going to be using GoZ, and the morph target I'm going to delete and just store it again. Go up to the highest level, go to layers, turn the layers on that you want. I'm just going to go just for that first layer there, and this is where you're going to decide how much you want of the deformation data to be included in the surface detail. So basically, the lower the subdivision level you go, the more of the volume data is going to try to include in the normal map. Because I just want the high frequency detail included, I'm going to go quite high. So I'm going to go say from this level here. If we just go into the geometry, level 3, so 3, 4, 5, 2 levels down from the highest. And what that means is the normal map's going to be creating the difference between here and the highest level. So it should be working quite well for us. So let's go to the normal map. We're going to click on adaptive, and they're going to create normal map. So now we've got both maps. Go to the lowest subdivisional level. I'm going to go to displacement, and that's on as well. We need to make sure that we go to the morph target, switch it, and now we're ready to go to the GoZ. So I'm going to click on GoZ, and it will send it over into Modo. So it's been sent over from ZBrush into Modo. if we go and look at the base mesh level, you can see here that we've got some surface form that's held from the original base mesh, which is going to give us our silhouette already held within the base mesh itself. And you can see here that the displacement map has already been set up for you and is ready to render out. A couple of things to note: that you want to make sure that the displacement map has got anti-aliasing turned off, because that can cause issues. Same for the normal map as well, that can cause issues for that. It tries to obviously sharpen up details that you really don't want to be sharpened up, so you definitely want to make sure that that is the case. Another thing is in the surface for the model, make sure you've got linear UVs turned on, and then once you've got that, then you can go ahead and do a render. And just one thing to just mention from an artistic point of view: if you want the details to really pop out, you want to not use too much global illumination, because it tends to flatten the image, and use a area light that's pointing down so that the shadows are captured in the bump detail. If you want to kind of really pull it out, the more of an angle that you create with the light, the more those details are going to really push out. Let's go for a render. So now the render's done, it's very clear that you can see the displacement doing its job and the bump map, or in this particular case the normal map, creating the surface detail. If we wanted to, we could turn off the surface detail and still have this deformation in the background, and vice versa. When I say deformation in the background, I mean the deformation applied to the model itself from the displacement map. This render that you see rendering right now is with the displacement map turned off. The render time is significantly faster when we're relying on the base mesh to retain its own detail. This is why that I mentioned earlier that if you can get the topology just right, so that it actually holds all of the forms, all of the mass and the volume, then you're going to be able to get some really nice details. The surface details are all from the normal map, and this has no displacement map on. The other feature or chance that you've got to work with this is the feature found in the render settings, and it's found in here, the settings, and we've got displacement as bump. What displacement as bump will do is it will mimic kind of what the normal map is doing. The difference is that it's going to be using the displacement map to do that, which is holding down the lower sub D level deformations. Of course, because it's faking it, it means it's not going to change the silhouette whatsoever. You can see, however, that the render time is significantly faster when you're using displacement as bump. You would only use the displacement as bump if you were to capture all of the high frequency details in the displacement map. Otherwise, there's not really much use of actually using that at all.